set for July. Let me bring up the.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will now call the May 4th, 2021 meeting of the Audit and Finance Committee to order. Can I get a motion on the adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approval of the minutes. If everyone has had an opportunity to read the minutes, and unless there are any changes to the minutes, may I get a motion on the approval of the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. The next is the monthly transportation report. Mr. Lynch.
Yes, good afternoon. I'd like to present the March transportation report. As of March 31st, 21, First Student had a total of 427 drivers for 390 routes. As of March 2020, there was a total driver count of 341 drivers for 357 routes. Our late bus lost instructional time tracking showed 214 hours of lost instructional time due to buses being late in March 2021. As of March 2020, we were 555 hours of lost instructional time. Our top 3 schools affected were Academic Magnet, Stall, and Pepper Hill, with the top 3 reasons being either driver-related, traffic, or bus breakdown. This data was based on 46 entries in total in our late bus log. As of right now, First Student is doing well as far as their numbers and their driver count. So far, they're trending at about 111% for year to date. For the month of March, they were 109% for staffing as opposed to routes. And that is all I have. Any questions?
Are there any questions from the committee?
Nope.
Michael, did you have a question?
I did not.
Okay, I had a question regarding the, it looks like, I was thinking last year, in March, were we at full capacity? Because we had 22,000 last year in March and 11,000. I don't remember when we closed the schools in 2020, but were we at full capacity at that time, Mr. Lynch?
I believe we closed schools March 17th. That's the date that rings a bell. I was waiting to get definitive numbers before I responded to your question regarding that. So I was kind of waiting to hear back from student information before I give you a specific answer on that. But March 17th was when school shut down.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Lynch? If not, Ms. Costello with the monthly capital projects report.
Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to present the March capital projects report to everyone. The 2017 through 2022 capital building program phase 4, the sales tax collections for February 2021 were $446,000 above the 2% financial model. The expenditures for the month were $6.4 million. For the 2010-2016 capital building program phase 3, the expenditures for the month were $108,000. The capital maintenance 8% funding was $571,000 for the month. And we will be receiving the fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 22 funds very shortly in May, and those projects are off and running. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Yes. So when are we going to be out of the 1016 program?
We are looking to close that out shortly. As you can see on the report, a lot of those projects are closed. We have the D3 bus lot and a few other ancillary projects closing out. Ms. Coates, our time frame is to bring you something during the summer. There's a small reallocation that needs to be made. And then by the fall, probably September or October, we're going to bring the first round of closeout, thus just leaving a few projects on that report.
So when will we be done with those projects? Didn't the revenue for those stop coming in 16?
Yes, they did. So the revenues are no longer coming in. We do have mainly the D3 bus lot project is the one that we're really waiting for.
And is there a plan to do a wrap-up audit at the end of this?
We have already done the final audit.
Midterm.
We did a
Okay.
mid and a final in this program. It's been a while, so it probably feels like we haven't done it. We did a final agreed upon procedure audit, and that is when the Citizens Oversight 1 committee passed it over to the Citizens Oversight 2 committee with a few lingering projects to monitor.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you, Mr. Costello.
You're
And,
welcome.
As we move forward, because of our not being together, if you have a question or comment, would you please identify yourself just so that everybody would know who the question or comment is coming from? Thank you. The next report is the audit report that was done by intern on the Department of Revenue. And Mr. Kennedy will cover that.
Thank you, ma'am. Also ask for your permission to introduce the newest member of the Audit and Finance Committee who has joined us before I do the report, if you don't mind.
That's fine. I couldn't see that she was on.
Trina just let me know. So Ms. Velma Stamp has joined the meeting. She's the one that's been selected for to replace Brett Johnson. Brett Johnson may join in later this afternoon. We'll see. Ms. Stamp had a planned meeting out of town, a trip out of town, so she dialed in a little bit late because of that. But want to welcome her. Just a bit of her background. I know I went over this last month, but she's currently the director of procurement at MUSC, as well as the director of grants at MUSC. And one of the reasons why we selected her and recommended her was because of the types of financial transactions that MUSC is involved in, similar to some degree as the types of transactions that we have here in the district, because we're both governmental entities. And she's replacing a person that came from the hospital system, Brett Johnson. So thank you, Ms. Stamp, for willing to serve.
Welcome, Ms. Stamp. Although I can't see you quite yet, I look forward to working with you, and thank you for your interest in the school district and taking on this community responsibility. Please reach out to me if there's anything I can help you with, or more importantly, reach out to Trina, because she's our guiding star and tells us all what we need to do. But welcome, we're glad to have you.
Thank you. And I look forward to working with all of you, and I will be on camera for the next meeting.
Okay, okay. So Don, you want to continue with the audit report?
I do. So this is the latest audit report that the district has received. It's an audit of the phase 4 sales tax program from March 1st, 2017 to June 30 of last year, 2020. This audit was requested by a representative, a state representative. It was conducted by the Department of Revenue. And this is the first time the Department of Revenue has audited CCSD. When we had in brief with the auditors, there was indication from the audit department, Department of Revenue, that the audit would take perhaps 3 to 4 weeks. Once they came in, it actually took 3 to 4 months. We have done these type of audits before, but not in a large system like CCSD. the complexities that we have, and so the experiences that the auditors have had in construction programs in school districts have been in smaller school districts. However, having gone through 3 to 4 months of audit and producing a report, the report's here, attached here, and there are no findings in the report, no findings. They did have 2 recommendations through this that we have looking at. One recommendation associated with how we manage cash flow. So it's a very complex process, trying to make sure that we have cash on hand when it's needed. They made some recommendations that may be a recommendation that may not align with how we completely manage our cash flow. So we're taking a look at that. And the second recommendation is a similar situation where they're asking us to think about combining cash accounts between the 2 funds. But again, the way we manage cash is we manage it more effectively through a single fund. And so we're looking through and analyzing those recommendations. However, I will say again, repeat again, there are no findings here. But because they've done an audit, they've presented recommendations, they have indicated that we are now in the Department of Revenue's queue, so there's an expectation there will be audits us in the future. And I would say, I think I heard a question a few minutes ago about the audit program. So the procedures that we have in place that Joyce reports out the financials on the capital, those procedures were developed 15 to 17 years ago. They've been audited extensively by our external auditors, by the external audit firm that we have come in to the agreed upon procedures of the report Elliott Davis issued report last summer, and now the Department of Revenue. So procedures have stood the test of time, at least for the last decade and a half. And so I think this report with no findings is a further testament to that procedures that the team has in place for financial. I'm sorry, what questions do you have?
Any questions for Mr. Kennedy about?
So, Mr. Kennedy, in terms of how they've recommended that we change how we sweep the accounts, how are we currently doing?
I'm sorry, say again, Ms. Coates.
So the DOR is referencing how we sweep the accounts weekly.
Mm-hmm.
How are we sweeping those out?
Jackie, I know you're on. Could you respond to that question, Carlin, please?
Yes, sir. One of the things that we noticed whenever they came in for an audit is that we didn't always have a consistent cutoff date. We would sweep whenever we needed basically cash for cash flow purposes. Okay. And so they asked that we tighten that up and have a more regimented schedule.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That answers your question, Ms. Coates?
Yes, that's why I said
Okay.
thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, that's provided for information so that we are informed of what's going on. The next item is the external audit firm update, and Mr. Kennedy will cover that as well.
I reported last month that our current external audit firm, Clifton Larson Allen, has decided to cease doing business in the state of South Carolina. There's some growth issues with the company. They're not a South Carolina-based company. So when it was time to go back out for an RFP to renew the contract for audit and services, they elected not to respond to the RFP. I had a pretty detailed discussion with them to understand what their rationale is, and it's a business decision based on their firm's growth. So we went out for a second RFP, and we received two responses. One from Green Finney, which is a South Carolina firm, and one from another firm that's not based in South Carolina, based in North Carolina. That firm does governmental audits in the states of South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, including some school districts here in South Carolina. They do not have a local office here in Charleston. They do have an office in Columbia, and whereas Green Finney has an office here in Charleston. And so there was a team that was assembled to evaluate these two proposals. And then, so each team member independently scored using a rubric for each of the teams, and there was unanimous decision to recommend and select Green Finney as the district's external auditor. What questions do you have?
Mr. Kennedy, this is Kent. What was the fee in the prior years? I know we've got the projection for going forward. So 2021 is the current fee? Is that right?
What was the question? I'm having a hard time here. Okay, hold on just a minute.
Yeah, could you repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, I was just trying to understand the history of the fees. This $96,000 for 2021. Is that under the current proposal, or is that's? I guess what I'm trying to understand is what was it previously under Clifton, Larson, Allen?
Yeah, okay, so I understand the question. So yeah, so these fees these are annual fees with escalation for each of those years as shown. Those fees that you see here covers the financial audit, the production of the financial statements, as well as the annual procurement audit. Jackie, do you know the annual cost that we had last year with Clifton, Larson, Allen?
Yes, sir. It was just around 87,000.
Was that for 1 year, Jackie, or for all of, I mean, the contract was for 5 years, did it go up every year like this one is, or was it 87 per year?
No, sir. No, ma'am. It did go up every year, and that included the external audit and the procurement audit.
And 87 was the max?
Yes, ma'am.
But that 87, I'm assuming, Jackie, you can correct me, that was the last year of a 5 or 6 year contract. So, you know, my assumption is that had they, no, it's just an assumption, but had they presented a proposal that it would not have been at 87,000, it would have been some number higher, and then it would escalate it from there.
Yes.
Kent, was that Kent that had a question, that had the question asked, and did that answer your question?
Sorry, yes, it did answer my question. I do think it's curious that they're no longer doing business in South Carolina. I see they don't have an office here, but it's obviously disappointing to lose the continuity. You know, we hadn't had them super long. But,
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. Are you saying about Clifton, Larson, Allen not having an office here?
Correct. I'm just acknowledging that it's disappointing that we have lost the continuity of them, and I'm not surprised that the fees are going to go up from here.
Right. In the way the audit partner explained it to me was that the firm had been expanding fairly rapidly, and then they got into some and they ended up expanding too rapidly, so they couldn't cover all of the locations. In fact, their firm is located, the state presence was in Columbia, so they didn't even have an office in Charleston. And the person who was the audit manager for the state of South Carolina decided to leave the firm. And so Clifton, Larson, Allen was not able to find someone who was willing to take a spot here in South Carolina. And so it was a business decision on their part to not continue.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Kennedy, were any of the 5 individuals that did the rating, were they employed with CCSD in 2016 when we left Green Finney?
So I think at least one person was, and that would have been, so Jackie, you just you make sure I'm saying this right. But I think the budget director, the budget director was one of the people that was evaluated on this proposal here, and the budget director, I believe, was in the district at that time, and I think she may have been the internal audit department. Is that correct, Jackie?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
So two things. Was there any discussion on the issues that led CCSD to severing that relationship, similar to the situation that required Berkeley County to sever that relationship? And have they changed anything? Was there any discussion of changes to the issues that came during their tenure with these districts?
So before I decided to even consider this firm as a potential proposal, I did my own research. A part of that, I looked at the fiscal years 13, 14, and 15. Fiscal years 13, 14, and 15. The audit reports that were produced by Green Finning, at that time it was Green Finning Horton, for the district. And I took a look at the PowerPoint presentations in each of those fiscal years that they made to the district. And I don't know where they made those, whether it was to the Audit and Finance Committee, to the board, to staff, but certainly the PowerPoint presentations that were presented here in the district, which I have copies of. And when I look at those three PowerPoints, it became very clear to me that the audit firm Green Finning Horton communicated through at least through those PowerPoints, and then if you look at the financial statements, it's the same thing. The fiscal direction that the district was headed in. So they started in 13 and pointed out the state requirement for fund balance in the GFOA recommendation. So the state requirement is 8.3% of general operating expenditures, and the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, recommends a minimum of 16.7%. So in 13, they pointed that out, and they had a graph that showed the position of the district's fund balance. They pointed out again in fiscal year 14, that graph showed a decline in the fund balance, and I think in fiscal year 15, well, starting in 15 showed additional decline, and I think in 15 the presentation it showed that the district's percentage, fund balance percentage, that's the percentage of general operating expenditures, was 3.9%, and they have been communicating for 3 years that we need to maintain at least the 8.3% to protect ourselves financially, and more probable we should be doing the 16%. So when I took a look at what they produced for the district in terms of financial statements and what they produced to the district in terms of their communication of where we were headed financially, it's pretty clear. And if you recall, when I came on board in fiscal year, in 2018, when I became the CFO here for the second time, one of the very first things I did, I took to the board a modification to the fund balance so that we can make sure that we get to the position that GFOA recommends, and we're clearly there now.
So, but what about the King Street TIF that was double tapped by mistake and some of the overtime issues? Any of those expenditures and those issues within the accounting of the district were not brought forward? And are you saying that Green Finning and Hortons didn't bear any responsibility for finding those things? I'm just thinking from a standpoint of how this looks to the community, is they went away for 4 years and they came right back, and in the interim of that, there's been some pretty severe financial mismanagement under their auditing in other districts, and I don't want the district to have any more drama than it tends to have. So was there any discussion on how they've changed any of their procedures to better catch those things on behalf of boards?
Well, I didn't take a look, Ms. Coates, at their auditing procedures prior to this proposal. In the proposal, they label it as their work plan for the audit. And just based on my experience, the type of analysis that they propose that they're doing would be the type of analysis that I would expect to see from an audit firm.
And do we have any reason to believe the procurement office is going to have any issues with the approval of the process based on that prior work?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Do you have any concerns that the procurement office is going to come back and deny this approval? The procurement office has to,
The district's procurement office?
well, you
Oh,
said
procurement
here
office.
the procurement
Oh, I
office
see.
is
I
in
see
the
what you're saying.
process.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So, and we have reached
That
out.
would be this.
We have reached out to the state, the state procurement office. I'm not sure if we have gotten a response. I think Wayne Wiltshire is on. Wayne, have we gotten a response yet from the state?
Good afternoon. No, we have not gotten a response back from the state. And basically that process, the state reviews the auditor to ensure that when they perform the procurement audit, that their procurement audit is in compliance.
That's the only piece that the state procurement office is reviewing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
My question is, and I don't know if this is an appropriate question, but can you give us some feel for the difference in the cost from this firm and what the other firm that submitted the bid, what was how significant was the difference in cost?
Yeah, so there were some cost differences. The other firm actually costs were, I don't remember the numbers, but they were definitely less than these numbers here. The cost here, I'm not sure they were significant, maybe $5,000 or $6,000. So that could be considered significant. So the deciding factor obviously then was not cost. It was one, the ability for the firm to have a local presence. It was their approach to how they would conduct the audit and produce financial statements. And it was also based on the additional supports that we asked this for each firm. What are some of the additional services that you could offer to the district? And so based on the list of services that Green Finney had versus the other firm, we thought on those three factors, we thought that the cost would not be the deciding factor.
And so I'm assuming that since it's coming to audit and finance, Dr. Postaway and you and others that would be looking at this feel very comfortable with the decision of bringing this audit firm back after. And I heard you loud and clear. I just guess I need to hear that y'all have, talked through this and you okay with bringing them back in.
Yeah, so we took a look at the districts that both firms are doing, have contracts in South Carolina. So Green Finney has the largest school district in the state. So they do Greenville Public Schools. I can't remember the school districts that the other firm did, but they did not. They're more medium to small size firms, and so Green Finney has done the larger firms in the state. So they have that level of complex, the level of knowledge to deal with the complexities of large districts. So that's so clearly that was a factor in our determination. And again, I go back to the work plan that they had put out.
Mr. Kennedy, this is Wayne Wilshire. I'd like to add that when we went out for a solicitation for auditors, I sent out a request to write out about 8 firms, and 5 of them responded back that they were not in a position to submit a proposal because of their workload. So there were very few auditors who were in a position to respond to our solicitation.
And then also in terms of bringing in an audit firm, it's always a challenge to bring a new audit firm up. This was not a deciding factor, but it is always a challenge to bring a firm up to speed that has no experience with an organization of our size, of any size really. So so one of the other factors that at least I after all the other factors have been considered, one of the other ones, this is not one of the factors in the evaluation rubric, but one of the ones that I did consider is that since they have a history here, history being an understanding of our financial processes, financial system, then it becomes easier to incorporate them back into the workflow that we have versus bringing in a new firm. Again, not the deciding factor. The deciding factors I just spoke about, the work that they do in the larger districts in the state of South Carolina, their work plan, their ability to provide services that I consider that we might need. So, for instance, we have, as the community knows, we have these these gas beats that we have to implement. So they are able to help us with those accounting services as well as other types of accounting services. At additional costs, but they're there.
This is Kent again. This challenge of getting firms to respond to an RFP, is that across school districts, or is there something specific about our school district that is causing firms to shy away from the work?
I think looking at the state, there are generally 3 firms, maybe 4 firms with this other firm here. Well, I would say 3 firms that historically have done work in the larger districts. So it's Green Finney, Horton, well, in this case, Green Finney, the Horton's dropped off, Elliott Davis, and Clifton Larson Allen. So we've talked about Clifton Larson Allen leaving the state. So that just leaves Green Finney and Elliott Davis. And so Elliott Davis, we contracted with a year ago or more to do our external work, or external audit work. So they issued, for instance, the risk assessment to the district back in, I think, June of last year. They're currently doing 2 internal audits for us, IT and procurement. And so they thought, the firm, Elliott Davis thought, and I agreed, that it would be a conflict of interest for them to come in and audit the work that they're essentially doing for us.
So Joyce, can I ask 2 more questions?
Pardon?
May I ask 2 more questions?
Sure.
So Wayne, was Green Finney one of the entities that responded to the RFP?
Yes, yes.
So when you sent out the RFP, I'm just confused because I didn't know that you RFP'd it when we used the exemption.
Well, when I say RFP, we requested proposals. I sent out a request for proposals for various firms.
Right. And so they did respond to that.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, on that. Again, that's provided for. So that doesn't require the committee's approval, is that right? It's just information.
That's correct. So the procurement code section 1250 gives the staff the authority to do that.
Okay. If there are no other questions on that issue, the next issue is the disparity study.
So I'll start off and ask Wayne to join in. So again, another RFP went out. We talked about this beginning of back in the winter time. So there were, I think, 4 firms that responded. There was a team. I was not on this particular team, but there was a team of individuals, including one person from outside the district that has a background in this type of work that met and evaluated those proposals. And they selected this Miller consulting firm. The amount here, $333,000, is not the lowest amount in the 4 firms, nor is it the high. Oh, there are the ranges there, $293,000 to $359,000. So Wayne, you want to talk a little bit more about why we selected this firm?
Yes, based on, as John was saying, they selected this. The scoring was based upon the project management approach to qualifications and experience of a Miller consultant. They were ranked their scoring was 10 points higher than the nearest competitor. And since this is an RFP, cost is not the major factor or the highest rated factor, which led to Miller being the highest ranked vendor. Miller is they're a firm out of North Carolina, but their intent is to use subcontractors that are located in Charleston and Richland County. That proposed cost of $333,000, that's not the final cost. Over the last few days, we've been in negotiations with them, and we've gotten them down to $314,000. That's based that process.
Are there any questions for Don or Wayne?
This is Michael Hallis. I just had one on that last item of how it's going to be funded. Is this coming from the capital programs, the 200,000 that we referenced in there?
That's correct.
And I guess which is it coming from, the current one in process or the upcoming one? And I assume the referendum allows for that. I just wanted to confirm that.
So Ms. Peoria, Jeff Young.
Yes, I am.
Can you address specifically where that?
It would come out of the sales tax phase 5 program, because that would be the use of the results. The use of the results would support the phase 5 program. So this would be part of our overhead cost from that.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And for those of us that have lost count, phase 5 is what years?
2023 to 2028. But as you recall, we are borrowing money in this upcoming ban to begin the program.
I didn't hear that question. I'm sorry. What was the question?
Ms. Coates was asking which specific phase program was this coming from, and it's phase 5. And Jeff was saying that we're going out for some advanced money on phase 5 with this coming ban. Well, actually just sold it last week, but it is $15 million that we're going out for advanced funding on this phase 5.
My question is, Wayne, can you give us some indication of specifically what we are asking this firm to do, or has that not been totally defined yet?
Well, the scope of work that we submitted defined what that firm will be doing to us, and once there's initial kickoff, and they will be more or less, I guess, develop the scope completely and then report back what that scope would look like. That would be the initial phase to kick it off. But mainly what they're going to be looking at is to review our processes, determine if they hamper are there any barriers for minorities to participate in our procurements.
And I think also, not think, I know it, and this is at a high level. So what they're going to do is across all of our procurements, whether it's capital or non-capital, they're going to take a look at what the opportunities are for procurements that have been issued and are being issued. Then they're going to look at the community. I'm not sure how the community is that will be defined, whether it's Charleston County, the state of South Carolina, but certainly take a look at all the firms that would be eligible to participate in those procurements. Then they would disaggregate that by the SWMB categories, including the minority firms. And they would say that, and then we'd take a look at those firms, all those firms, say, did those firms have the capacity to do the work of the procurements that we put out? And so then they would compare the firm's ability, the number of firms' abilities to be able to do the work to the amount of work that was awarded, and then see if there's a gap. And if there's a gap between the ability, the capacity, I think they call it, and what we award, if there's a gap, then they would explore why does that gap exist, and then offer recommendations on how to close that gap, those gaps.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Since this is a selected firm, it's not, I think this is information, correct?
Correct.
Can we see the RFP? I mean, we're no longer in the process of negotiation. Is the RFP public information?
Yes, it is. So
Yes.
we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
So Wayne, can you make note of that, please?
You want the RFP?
RFP, yep.
Yes, I can provide that.
Thank you, Mr. Welcher. It will be helpful when we see what their final product is, how closely it follows what we asked for and what they proposed.
Any other questions? Thank you, Wayne.
You're
So
welcome.
The next item is the monthly financial report.
I'm not going to go through a lot of details on the monthly financial report. There's been one significant change, which I'll cover here in a second. But other than that one significant change, there's not been a lot of changes. So this report is as of March 31st, so the first 9 quarters, first 9 months of the year. And so we have 3 months or 1 quarter left. So historically, over the last 3 years or so, by the time we get down to 2 to 3 months of left in the years, projections then become, they've been refined and they become pretty accurate. The variance from last month to this month is shown here at the bottom line. So right here, this $18.9 million. We are projecting that when we close the books this year or in the year, that we will be closing $18.9 million in the black. So revenues exceeding expenditures. The difference between this month and the February report was that number, instead of 18.9 million, that was 24 point something million dollars. So it's clearly it's a drop. The drop is here, the $5.5 million here. Most of that is associated with the board's vote last night to give a second bonus to employees. So that bonus is estimated to be $5.2 million. And so this report here, the monthly financial report, was submitted prior to the vote, but we were able to estimate how much the cost would be. And because it was a high probability that it would occur, we disclosed that in this monthly financial report. And so that number then is what drove the $24 million expected year end down to 18.9 million. What we did not disclose here in the report is because we just worked through it this weekend and finalized it yesterday, is that if the committee and the board members will remember rather, that last year when we were developing the budget, right after the COVID pandemic hit, we put measures in place to slow down spending so that we could reserve money from this year's budget, or last year's budget, to support this year's budget. And so we have $4.3 million, I think it is, that we decided on just recently that we're going to do the same thing this year. And so this number of $18.9 million, when we look at it in the June committee meeting, that number will go up again by that $4 million. Now, there are any other changes, between the revenues and expenditures that will impact that. But again, the only significant change is between last month's report and this month's report is the addition of the $5.2 million of unbudgeted bonuses that the board approved last night. What questions do you have?
So this is Kent again. So if I follow this correctly, we had originally anticipated using $31 million from the fund balance. And if this were to hold true to form, presumably the use of fund balance would be closer to 12 million or whatever the difference, it would come down by the 18.8 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. And when I go through the proposed budget, the first reading in a few minutes, then I'll have the details on how to check on changes in fund balance.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry. I'm really having hard time explaining. Hearing. So I'm not exactly sure I understood the question itself. I know it's around fund balance and how it changes. And so when I say yes, I'm not sure I'm responding to the question because I'm not sure I completely understand the question. However, when I go through the budget documents in a few minutes, I will thoroughly explain the impact to fund balance.
Okay, any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the business systems metrics.
This is simply for your information today. So as you know, we're working on trying to improve our business systems. The immune system upgrade is complete. The dimensions of the dimensions, if you record, remember, is from a transition from the Cronus timekeeping system to this what the company is called Dimension. It's the same corporation, but a much improved system. There's been some issues with the lead module that we in the firm are trying to work out. As soon as we get those worked out, then the other things that we had planned for in terms of the improvements that we had planned for this year will be ready to put those in place with the immune system and the Dimension system. So the Munis is the district's financial and human resources system, whereas the Dimensions is a timekeeping system that interfaces with the financial system. Here on these historical edits here, this is a process that we've been working on to make sure that we decrease the amount of transactions that the payroll department has to go back and make corrections to time sheets. Some of that is related to the Dimensions. Some of the improvements that are related to the Dimensions upgrade. And so we're waiting for those issues with that upgrade to be worked out. Working on improving processes associated with the P card. So that's moving along with part of that again is working within the Munis system here. And that's currently being tested now that the Munis upgrade has been done. One of the issues that we've had is trying to make sure that we reconcile what the Kelly services provide for our, what they record with our substitute teachers and how we have that recorded at Munis. And so that project was postponed also due to the systems upgrade. And again, as soon as we get the Dimensions problem worked out, we'll be back on top of that. And then the last one, bookkeeper support. This is bookkeeper support, bookkeepers at schools. So we have this plan to make changes. We had a plan to have 10 bookkeepers. We want to upgrade them, provide this high level training, and use that as the basis to begin professional development throughout the district. That's delayed, was delayed because of the COVID pandemic, but they're still in the plans to do. So that's just where we are. A lot of this is on hold because of those reasons, the pandemic and the system upgrades.
Do we know when we will, for instance, on the bookkeepers, when we will be able to resume that?
Well, I think, Ms. Green, it depends to some degree on how things work out this summer with the COVID virus, and whether or not we continue in the local area to continue to decrease those incidents of COVID, and then when we're able to do so and be able to work more effectively with schools. So, for instance, the schools were really stretched this year not enough staff. We had to deploy staff from central office to work in schools, and the bookkeepers were been overwhelmed in schools. So it's a matter of trying to get the work level back to where it was pre-pandemic, so that we don't overwhelm the schools more.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one on the Kelly and Munis. When are those upgrades going to be done? It seemed like those upgrades have been there for a while.
Yeah, so the Munis upgrade is done. So that upgrade is complete. So the upgrade is complete on Munis. The upgrade with dimensions, the upgrade is actually complete, but we're having some issues with the one of the modules, the lead module. And so that piece has not been worked out, and we're still working through that. So once we get through that, then we should have all of our systems upgraded that we had planned on upgrading this, the last year.
And so then that'll allow you to get back and have the Kelly and Munis systems, report showing, for the schools, what teachers are requesting leave, right?
That is correct. So that would come through the Kelly sub request versus Munis here.
Mm-hmm.
So yes.
All right.
Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so now we are at the point of the first reading of the budget. So just, I don't know how long this will take. Does anybody need a break or anything? Are we okay to keep moving? Okay, we'll keep moving.
One second. This is going to be in two parts. The first part is labeled here, it's PowerPoint, the paradox of influx of federal COVID relief. That's relief, should say relief dollars and local taxes. So what I'm going to demonstrate here, or try to attempt to demonstrate, let me just show you a second what I have here. So this table reflects the amount of additional dollars that the district will receive as a result of the COVID relief funding that's coming from the federal government. So if you remember that in last year when we were building the budget, there was a number that we had, and it shows in the monthly financial report I just went over, a $13.4 million allocation from what we call the ESSER1 funding, which is the elementaries. So, oh, really?
I didn't mean to interrupt, but it looks like.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Am I still logged in? Am I still logged in? Right?
It was showing your screen. It's not showing your screen.
Am I still logged in?
You are.
Can't get back to my Okay, sorry. So the chair walked out, so perhaps I should wait a second. Okay, so before I get into the idea of a paradox here, let me talk about the numbers. So again, because of the COVID pandemic, the federal government is issuing 3 series of appropriations to school districts. The first one is on the ESSER-1, which is the elementary, secondary schools, elementary and secondary schools education relief fund. The first round funding is ESSER-1. It came out last spring. For Charleston County School District, we received $13.4 million. So the 13.4 we put together, it was primarily for purposes of making sure that we were able to open schools safely. So we put all the safety, used the money for safety protocols, as well as some academic purposes. So that funding came under the Trump administration and the Congress from spring of last year. And then in December, in the end of December this past year, again with the Trump administration and the then Congress, they came out with ESSER-2 funding. The state of South Carolina, I believe, received like $954 million for K-12. Out of that amount, 72.6 has been identified for appropriations for CCSD. And then with the Biden administration, when they released their American Rescue Plan a few weeks ago, the state received $2.1 billion. And out of the $2.1 billion, the amount that CCSD is expected to get, when I say not actually expected, we will receive $163.1 million. The state just posted those numbers on their website, I think this past Friday. And so over the next 3.5 years, then we will receive a total of $249.2 million. ESSER-1 has to be spent by September of next year, ESSER-2 September 2023, and the American Rescue Plan, which is also called ESSER-3, by September of 2024. So one of the questions that's come up is that if a school district is going to be receiving significant appropriations, additional appropriations from the federal government, why do we need to potentially increase taxes or increase millage? And so I want to talk a little bit about that, and this is the paradox. And so it's all federal funding sources of fund. There are restrictions on how those dollars can be used. So with these ESSER-1s, ESSER-2, and ESSER-3, each has a list of spending requirements. ESSER-1 has 12 categories, ESSER-2 has 15 categories, and ESSER-3 has 15 categories. The first round of ESSER-1, the 13.4 million, those categories were very restrictive. You had to use them for specific purposes. ESSER-2 is very similar. The requirements are similar to the ESSER-1 in terms of the restriction. And then when we get into the American Rescue Plan, or ESSER 3, the categories become more broad. So you can use them for more things than just the reopening. So I've listed here on this slide some of the things that you can use ESSER 3 for, which is the larger amount, 163 million. So continue with the COVID safety protocols. So we here as a district through Jeff Barori Shop done a lot of work in terms of the safety in schools to make sure that staff and students can be safe from the pandemic. Recovery from learning loss. So that's obviously coming out of the academic shop, Carolyn Belcher. So this third category is pretty broad here. So the education, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, that includes like this students with disabilities and a number of other things. So anything that's authorized under that act can be used for ESSER 3, addressing the unique needs of certain students. The demographics are shown here. Educational technology, mental health services, summer learning and supplemental after school programs, facilities repairs to reduce risk of the pandemic virus transmission, and other activities activities necessary to maintain continuity of services. So clearly, looking at these categories here under ESSER 3, some of those could potentially be considered the general operating fund type expenditures. One of the problems, though, is that it's timing. So in order to begin spending any of these dollars for any school district, so we are required to develop plans on how those dollars will be used, submit those plans to the State Department of Education. The State Department of Education in turn reviews and then either approves the plan or asks us to make changes and then do a final approval. And so before we can begin spending on any of these funds, that process has to be followed. The only fund of the three that we've done that with so far is the 13.4 ESSER 1. So we submitted plans last summer and we began spending them immediately thereafter. And generally also the funds have to be spent in the order in which they were appropriated. So we couldn't just start with the ESSER 3 funds, the larger ones that we're gonna start using those funds, and we haven't even submitted plans for ESSER 2, and we haven't started spending those dollars. In fact, we have not even completed spending on ESSER 1 yet. There's some, I think that's maybe, at least based on our initial discussion with the State Department, there may be some relaxation of the sort of like the spending timeline. We might be able to start spending ESSER 2 before all the ESSER 3, for example, funds have been exhausted. So that's that is a an issue in trying to be able to use money from these ESSER funds to offset some of the expenditures in the general operating fund. However, there are some uses that we can do that with. So, for example, when we built the budget last year, when we did our enrollment projection, this is before the pandemic. When we did the enrollment projection, we projected how many students would be in school in the fall, and when September came and students enrolled, that number of students that enrolled was significantly less than the number of students that we had projected. So we over projected. That means that we allocated more funds to schools than they would have earned based on the number of students that they have. And then those resources then get converted into a staff. So, teachers, as an example, primarily. And so what we decided to do last fall, as you know, every September, we do a comparison between projected enrollment and actual enrollment, and we make adjustments in staff at schools. We did not make any adjustments this past fall. So if a school had one or two teachers or however many teachers that they did not earn, we did not pull those allocations back. And so we kept those in because of the need to support students and staff around because of the pandemic. And so those types of costs can be shifted over to the ESSER 2 fund. So we're looking at those types of things, as well as another example here, the summer learning. And then the last piece here is some of the risk. So it's a lot of money coming in, and there's some risk associated with it. One is this what's called this the funding cliff. So we hire staff as an organization using this additional money. We put programs in place, but at some point the dollars are going to go away. So then, how do we think about maintaining effective programs. Last week, I think it was, towards the end of last week, there was an article in the paper up in Greenville, and they were talking about this Greenville school district budget. So their proposed budget for fiscal year 22 does not include a tax increase. But the way they describe that in the newspaper is that the district, Greenville, has, I think their budget is about $700 something million. That's their operating fund budget. They haven't fund balance $235 million. They have either 230, 235. It's around 30 to 35% of their general operating fund is in the fund balance. So it's a significant amount. So they can use that amount to help offset any increase in cost. And if you recall, last year we did the same thing. So we used $33 million of fund balance to be able to offset increased costs versus increase in taxes. So last year when we built the budget for fiscal year 21, we did so we increased costs, and we were able to do that without the tax increase because of the use of fund balance. Our fund balance is nowhere near 30 or 35%. It's much lower, as you'll see shortly when I present that information. And also, I'm going to present in a few minutes in the budget numbers, taking a look at Greenville's budget versus us. So the Greenville School District receives roughly 2/3 of this budget, this funding from the state, roughly 2/3. So that means 1/3 of it is local dollars. And it's the reverse here in Charleston. We receive roughly 1/3 of our funding from the state, and we're expected to come up with which we have to do with the 2/3 of it. The last risk here is the inadequate planning could result in lost opportunity. So this is an opportunity with this infusion of additional dollars to really rethink how we support our families and our children. So we want to make sure that we have appropriate planning to make sure that happens. So I just want to give that high-level overview. On May 10th, at the committee of the whole, we will get into more details about how we think about, should we think about the funds, but I just want the committee to know this as we think about the numbers and any potential tax increase for next year. So before I bring up the next slide, getting into the numbers for next year, what questions do you have?
Any questions for Mr. Kennedy on the COVID relief?
Have you already, this is Kent, have you, how far are you down the path of trying to define the bucket of costs and bucket of programs that would qualify for, phase 2 and the potential phase 3?
Yeah, if the question is how far are we along the path of planning for the use of those funds, we have not done a significant amount for planning yet for either phase, ESSA 2 or ESSA 3. The only complete plans, as I indicated, are for ESSA 1, the $13.4 million. We have begun to look at the planning for ESSA 2, but we haven't made. We're not close yet to being able to submit that to the state.
Do you think you will be able to identify programs of a magnitude to fully utilize the phase 3 if that comes to fruition?
So I'm sorry, for clarification, you said if it comes to fruition?
If we got the full phase 3 allocation, do you think we would be able to use it all?
So first of all, just for clarification, there's no, we will get $163.1 million. So the state has already received the appropriation of $2.1 billion from the government, the federal government.
Got it.
And then last Friday, they released the exact dollar amounts that each school district would receive. So the 160, but prior to Friday, my staff was estimating how much we would get. We were estimating 162 million, but the actual number is 163. And then the other question related to, do we think, or do I think we can spend it all? It is, my thinking on that is reflected in this last bullet here on adequate planning. So if we plan appropriately, as you know, if the planning is done appropriately, in how we manage these funds, it's done appropriately, we can get some results. So those are two big things that have to take place: adequate planning and adequate management of it.
Thank you.
What does ERSA stand for?
Yeah, what does ESSA? ESSA stand for?
Yeah.
ESSA stands for the Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief.
And when you referred on one of these slides to ESSA 3, you are talking about the American Rescue Plan funding, right?
I am. So you'll see it used both ways as the American Rescue Plan and ESSA 3.
Okay. Are there any other questions about the COVID relief funding? I know there are some other board members on. If you guys have any questions, just speak up. Okay.
Switch over. Switch files again.
Don, when does the plan have to be submitted for the second ERSA?
There's no current timeline, but so the urgency is around getting the plan in so we have adequate time to spend. And next, I'm going to get into the numbers for the, how we're thinking about the fiscal year 22 budget. So before we look at the numbers, let's talk a little bit about the process. So this afternoon, what I'm presenting to the Audit and Finance Committee, a set of summary data, the purpose of which is to make sure that the committee understands the numbers, make sure that if there are questions of me or my staff for clarification on the numbers or suggestion how we think differently. So I want to make sure though that as we go forward in this process over the next 2 months, that the committee understands the numbers. And then this coming Monday at the committee of the whole, we will present not only summary numbers, but we also have each chief go through their various divisions and talk details about what these summary numbers will represent for the proposed budget for next year. Once that happens, and then we will make adjustments based on any responses this afternoon, as well as on May 10th. Then we will take to the board on May 24th the proposed first reading of the budget. They will provide additional feedback. We will make adjustments based on that feedback. And then on June 1, the 1st of June, we will come back to the Audit and Finance Committee and with whatever revisions that we've had over the preceding succeeding month. And then once that happens on June 1st, at the committee of the whole in June, we will repeat that process that we will do this coming May 10th. And we will again have the budget workshop so that we make sure that the board understand what changes have taken place based on input that they gave us this month, and then what additional changes we might need to make before we take the second reading and final reading and approval of the budget on June 28th. So that's sort of like the process and how we get from where we are now to getting an adopted budget on June 28th. So staff has worked through numerous scenarios on how we would think about a budget for next year. What I'm going to present here are 3 of those scenarios. This first page is a very high level summary, and then I will provide, well, I say I won't provide a significant amount of details. I will provide enough detail for you to understand what these summary numbers represent. But on May 10th, there'll be more details that will be presented to the full board. So three scenarios. One, in this first column, a no millage increase. The second one is a 4.7 mil increase, and the value of a mill is about $2.9 million, so that's 13 point something million. And then the third option is a 3.4 mil increase. And so I just tell you up front that what I'll be recommending this afternoon is the 3.4 mil increase. But I explain the revenue numbers and the expenditure numbers on each, and then when I get into the details, I'll focus on the 3.4 mil. So starting with revenue, our projected revenue, this is based on our closely working with the county auditors for local revenue, trying to understand what the state appropriations might be for next year. So with a no millage increase, that revenue number is projected to be $582.2 million. Going across here for the 4.7 mil increase, that goes up to 595, almost $596 million. So if you recall, I said the value of this 4.7 mil increase is like $13 million. So I just added it to the 582. And then the 3.4 mil increase, then the revenue becomes this number, the 592. Now in these numbers, in each of these revenue numbers, we have a real small dollar estimate of $500,000 associated with changes in TIF withholdings, and so we're waiting to get more clarity from the state, not state, but the county auditor. That number could go up slightly, but these numbers right now at this high level are pretty much what the revenue numbers should be. Now that's what's not reflected in those numbers, however, is anything that the state might appropriate or not appropriate later in the summer. So they will not complete their, I can't remember what the exact number is. So they've got like a $1.6 billion revenue more than they're anticipated. And so what they do with that, it may not, if there's anything that they would appropriate to school districts, it's not reflected in here. And then also there's this unexpected collection of sales tax, which right now we don't understand if that's going to have any impact on our revenue or not. I mean, if it does, it wouldn't be negative, but so we have no way of estimating what any of that impact might be. We reached out to the county treasurer, we reached out to the state, and so we hopefully we'll get some clarification before too long. So those are the revenue numbers that we're projecting. And then with the base expenditures here, so we switched a few years ago on how we start our budget for expenditures. In a lot of instances, the starting point for building the expenditures is looking at the prior year's budget. The prior year's budget, the number's not shown here, but it was I think it's about $581 million of expenditures. And so instead of the starting point being the prior year's budget, the part of our financial analysis, our detailed analysis when we present the monthly financial report, when we're predicting where we're going to end the year, projecting where we're going to end the year. We use that, so last month we presented the multi-year financial plan. And so looking at what our projections were then, we use that as the basis to begin building the expenditures for next year. And so that number is, well, in the financial plan, it shows $576 million, but we did make a reduction of $4.2 million associated with enrollment changes. So the enrollment numbers that we have for fiscal year, the next school year, those numbers are going to be lower than what we projected last year. So we had to make an adjustment down because we will not incur those expenditures next year. We might move some of that over to ESSER, but we will not incur that in the general operating fund if those positions are still needed, that is. And so what we look at next then is the funds available to allocate to new expenditures. So the $572 million is the base. So these are expenditures that we expect to carry over from this year into next year. If we subtract that from what we see as the potential available revenue, or projecting as available revenue, and then that difference between these two numbers, then revenue and expenditures, gives us the number that we have to allocate for new expenditures. So for the no millage increases to 9.7, for the 4.7 mil, you can see it's 23.5 and 19.8 over here for the 3.4 mil. So I'll go through details here in a minute on these required expenditure increases. I'll just give you sort of like a preview. So for instance, we have a requirement to increase by 1%. This is a state requirement, the amount that the district contributes for retirement. And so I think the number is $2.something million. So we don't have any choice but to fund that next year. So when we look at all the required expenditures, which I'll show you in a minute, then that number comes to this $26.5 million. That's consistent across here for each of those options. And then for mission critical here, this $2.2 million reduction, these are expenditures that we don't expect, that were budgeted for this year that we don't expect to spend next year. So we reduce that. And so for the no millage increase, then the total expenditures is like $24.3 million projected. And so if you compare that, then the 24.3 million to the 9.7 million available, so that's obviously a gap. And here we talk about how we would close that gap. And see, I'll talk more details about these use of fund balance, but that's how we do it. And so in this instance, for the no millage increase, the $14.6 million of our fund balance for the going back to the 4.7 mil increase, actually both of them, 4.7 and 3.4. So you can see right here, total expenditures for the no millage increase is 24.3. Plus the only thing we added in are those items that are required that we have very little, if any, latitude to opt in or opt out. Here, we carry that same number over here into both the 4.7 and 3.4 mils, but we also add in this additional expenditure request that we're making, and so it's roughly $16 million, so 16.6 and 9.8, and so that add that $16 million, essentially to the 24 million here, and so then the total expenditure addition would be under these two scenarios would be $40.8 million, $40.8 million. And again, that obviously leaves a gap between what's available up here, is 23.5 and 19.8, and the expenditures. And so then again, in order to have a balanced budget, we look into the use of fund balance and how we would do that. So looking at fund balance, use of fund balance, unspent mission critical. So we have $2.7 million in mission critical that was approved this year that we didn't spend. This 2.2 here is that when we look at the budget next year, we're going to reduce the expenditures by 2.2. So this, whatever the mission critical amount was last year, I think it's 12.6. We're saying we're not going to use 2.2 of that next year, and then it's 2.7 that was not used this year. So 2.7 then goes in. It would, since we're not going to spend it, it'll go into fund balance when we close the books, and then we will pull it out of fund balance as a part of balance in the budget. The same thing with this $4.3 million. So I mentioned when I did the monthly financial report, where we have 18-point-something million that we projected in the year. I said that when I present next month, because we just made a decision here yesterday that we see where we can save an additional $4.3 million this year in this year's budget, pretty much the same way we did last year, whereas last year we saved like 10-point-something million. but we looked at it earlier. So this year it's only 4.3. So again, once we save those dollars, it would drop to the bottom line into fund balance when the books are closed, but then we would pull it back out and put it into to this budget here. And then the next one here under the 3.4 mil increase, we have a $3.7 million use of fund balance associated with the special education request. Now I'm going to get into more details on this one. So in a few minutes, I'll get into what that really, really is about. And then the final section here, this $10.4 million would be just pulling out of existing fund balance. So the first two, the 2.7 and 4.3, these would be savings from the current year, deliberately so, unspent dollars that would roll into fund balance with the intent of our pulling them out. The 13.7 and the 10.4, these represent a reduction of fund balance that we currently have. And again, I'll get into in a second what that looks like, which is down here at the bottom of this page. But before I get into that, I'm going to stop here and see what questions you might have around the high level revenue and the high level expenditures. And also remember that I'm going to get into some more details on the expenditures in a few minutes. So what questions do you have?
Any questions for Mr. Kennedy regarding the summary that he has just gone through? Okay, I have one question. And I'm sure you were gonna discuss this, but why is the special education request only under the 3.4 million? I mean, the 3.4 million, the third column, and not included in the others?
Well, it's actually included in, if you go up to the total expenditures, the 40.8 million, the special ed request is included in the expenditure. It's just how we fund it. We propose to fund it differently in the 4.7 versus the 3.4. The 4.7 generates more revenue because it's raising, the millage is higher. So we have more revenue to cover it. And on the 3.4, we have less. And I'm going to get into the details of how we're going to fund that, how we propose to fund that under the last column of the 3.4 mil increase. But the expenditure, so the fund balance, this is revenue to fund an expenditure. But if you look at the expenditure at $40.8 million above in both instances, well, those numbers are the same, the 40.8 in both instances. And those numbers include the increases in special education.
Okay.
And so you'll see that in a few minutes when I go through some of the details.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Kennedy? Okay, well, keep that.
All right, so next we'll take a look at the fund balance. And I'm going to focus, since the recommendation is a 3.4 million increase, I'm going to focus on this column here, but the numbers will be, some of the numbers will be different, but the concepts are the same. So currently, on our balance sheet for our fiscal year 20 financial statements, we have a fund balance of $145.2 million. So that's currently on the books. As I indicated earlier, what we did last year, instead of recommending a tax increase, we recommended that we use $33.8 million of that $145.2 million to balance the fiscal year 21 budget. So what that did then from a budget standpoint, it drew down the reserves from 145.2 to this $111.4 million. So you take a look at our budget for this year, we have a planned fund balance of $111.4 million. Our project, oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Go back to where I was. Jeez. All right, so back where we were. So what we were projecting to end the year of fund balance at the, so budgeted 111.4, going through the monthly financial statements, you see we're adding more dollars to the fund balance because we have a positive. So we didn't use all the 33.8 that we had planned on, the 33.8 from fund balance this year. And so we were projecting to have a fund balance at the end of the year of $135.6 million. We had to reduce that by 5.2 million just last night because of the board vote for the bonuses. So the bonuses are not budgeted, and so that we had to reduce. We went from $24 million down to 18 point something million dollars because of that $5.2 million unplanned expenditure. And then we also, though, added back 4.3 from those expenditure reductions that I talked about a few minutes ago that are not reflected in the monthly financial reports that I went through a few minutes ago. So when we do all of the math, then what we expect to end the year in fund balance is this $134.7 million, 134.7 versus the 111.4 that we had planned, we had budgeted. And so under this option here, which is the 3.4 mil, we are proposing that we use $21 million of this 134 million to balance the budget. And you can look at the other three options here that if we went with a 4.7 mil increase, then that number of fund balance usage would be 17.4. No millage increase would only fund the required expenditures, then we use 14.6. So when you do the math, then what we would, in this scenario here, what we would budget for the fiscal year 22 budget would be a fund balance at year end 113.6 million, 18.5% of the general operating fund. And if you recall, the state requirement is that a minimum of 8.3% that has to be in fund balance, whereas the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, a minimum recommendation is 16.7%. So in both instances, we would, with this 18.5%, we would exceed both the requirement and the recommendation.
Joyce, may I ask a question?
Please.
So, Mr. Kennedy, net of everything that's in this section on the fund balance is that we anticipated using $33 million of fund balance in FY21. Am I correct with my numbers that we're going to end up only using about 15?
That's correct. We're going. I haven't done the math on that, but it'll be significantly less than that, than the 33.8.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And so that's a good point. So if the committee would keep that in mind, that we're going to be using in fiscal year 21 less fund balance than what we projected. That was the same situation in the prior year and the year prior to that, because we've been significantly adding to fund balance over the last few years. I have a graph that I've showed recently where fund balance maybe 4 years ago was, I think, $77 million or so, and so with Glenn Stein, my professor, he started the trajectory in which we've continued. So now we're at from 70-something million to 145.2. Other questions on this section? All right. Next, then I'm going to go into some details, and the other chief officers on board. So I may ask them to join in the conversation. Certainly next Monday they will be presenting their plans to the full board. So here in the top in the blue, it says 3.4 mil increase. So we have several pages here that show details. We have several pages, the same pages for all the options, the 0 millage option, the 4.7 mil option, and the 3.4 mil option. I'm only presenting this afternoon the details for the 3.4 mil option. And the reason being is this is two. The reasons are one, this is the option that that the staff is recommending, option 3.4 mil increase. And the numbers on each of the options on the details are the same. The revenue numbers are the same. The expenditure numbers are the same. It's just that the only numbers would be different, be the use of fund balance. It's just a matter of not whether or not we want, as an organization, which option you want to choose. But all of the numbers are the same except for the fund balance, which I just showed you. All right, so starting here at the top here, the revenue numbers here that we're anticipating. We looked at what was budgeted last year, $538.6 million. We have $585 million of budgeted expenditures. Now remember, our starting point this year is $572 million, which is less than the $585.9 that was budgeted. The difference here, the $47.3 million of expenditures exceeding revenues in the budget. That was covered by the 33-point-something million dollars, 33.8 in the fund balance that we talked about a minute ago. And then there's a footnote at the end of this section here. That footnote shows how the 47.3 million was covered. Again, the 33.8 plus the $13.4 million that we received in the COVID relief last year. So we put those into allowable categories. And so here for the projected revenue for this option, again, from the previous page, it's the $592 million. And then we have the base amount. I talked about, I don't know, we talked about what we're pulling out of base here because of enrollment changes. So we just subtract the $4 million from 576. That gets you back to the base of expenditures of 572. And so this number of $19.8 million is the number from the preceding page saying they're available for allocation. So those are, so that top is, the numbers are presented slightly differently, but it's the same information. And then the required expenditures here, this $26.5 million is from the previous page. And I'll go through the details in a second. And then the differences here associated with how we saved $2.2 million in mission critical brings this number down to $24 million of expenditures. So let's take a look at what that 24-point-something million dollars represent in the required section. So the mandated by the state step increase for teachers. So that's $4.2 million. If you recall from last year, the state had a hiatus on the step increase, and they didn't do that until much later in the fiscal year. In fact, we haven't even paid it yet. We're going to pay it, I think, on this payday, this upcoming payday. But anyway, for next year, they've already mandated the step increase. They've also indicated a $1,000 salary increase, they being the state. And so that's another $4.7 million. So one of the unknowns from the states, how much of that they will fund. At least in recent years, they have not funded that type of increase 100%, at least not for Charleston. What we have put into the revenue numbers as an estimate is half of that 4.6 or $2.3 million. So that could change if the state election decides to pay more of that $1,000. But currently we have 50% of that $4.7 million Can y'all hear me? You can?
Yes.
Okay, I'm back. I was talking about the state and that kicked me out. Retirement increase mandated by the state, that's $2.8 million. I've shown a table before, a schedule before. In fiscal year, I don't know, maybe 15 or so, all state, governments, local governments, well, not state governments, were required to fund like 15% annually of the employees' retirement. That created a huge liability on the state's financial statements. They decided to push a portion of liability out to local governments, and so they developed a schedule that the percentage of payment would increase between fiscal year 15 and fiscal year 23. And so it's 1% per year up until fiscal year 23. And so this percentage amount for us this year is $2.8 million. Next year, fiscal year 23 should be the last year, but that percentage of participation is from 15% to 23%, I think it is. So it's a significant increase over the life of that increase, or that life of the shift in the liability from the state to the local governments. Health and dental increase mandated by the state again. So we have very little control over the health and dental increases. The charter schools in Meeting Street is $4.3 million. That's an estimate, so that number could change, but it's an estimate based on the state charter school funding formula, which is a reflection of primarily two factors. One is the amount of revenue that the district gets in, and the student demographics of students in each charter school. So we will make an adjustment to that as we get into more refinement of the numbers around the student count. The 135th day numbers were just submitted to the state this past Friday, and they haven't approved them yet, but they have been submitted. And so once we get approval, we'll take another look at this. The West Ashley, so we have a new school that's opening up in West Ashley, the Center for Advanced Studies. So we have the staff of that. Translation Services, Department of Justice settlement, so it's $846,000. Property and flood insurance, so it's an estimated increase of $2.5 million. And so last year there was no, with our insurance providers, we did not, there was not an increase in this insurance cost. And so this actually represents a two-year change from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 22. Transportation cost here, contract. So we're going to make an adjustment here. We have $449 that we just found, $449,000. We just found out that we're not going to incur costs on this contract, that we will adjust down. One thing that's missing from the budget is additional support in the communications department to help with with this community engagement around all these funds coming in. So that's much of that 449, things like $420,000 will be shifted there. So the bottom line numbers don't change significantly, but a couple categories will change. Utility changes here. And again, the chief officer is on board, so if there are any questions of Mr. Barori, we can do that here. And if not, Mr. Barori will be presenting more details at the committee of the whole on Monday. A decrease in energy costs because of issues associated with COVID. So obviously, I'd like to see the decreases there. Operations, other contractual obligations, and footprint growth. So we have bringing on more buildings, so we have more square feet that we have to maintain, more square feet that we have to clean, more grounds that we have to maintain. So that entails additional contracts to do that. And then last, a few months ago, the board approved increasing the number of certified Head Start teachers, and that dollar values that we had approved to move to the general fund was just $388,000. And here, this reduction again is associated with the mission critical. So the $1,100,000 here increase. New expenditures for mission critical, so expenditures that we did not use, we did not plan for in fiscal year 21, And then, but we have a reduction of 3.3 that we didn't use in 1.1 in 22, and 3.3 that we're using the shift for from 21, gives us a net decrease of 2.2 million. So that gets us down to the required expenditures of 24 point something million dollars. Now, before I go into the next section, which is so if you recall from the first page, the summary page, for the no millage increase, this was the number was an expenditure increase of 24 point something million dollars. That's what this represents, the required. In addition to that, for the other two scenarios, the total expenditure was $40 million. And so I'm going to get into the $40 million, the $16 million that makes up the total of $40 million in a second. As soon as I pause here and see if committee members have any questions on these required increases.
Any questions? Oh, y'all are really quiet.
This is Velma. I have a question. Trying to understand how the required increases tie back to the funds available for allocation, and then the fund balances that you were showing on the previous schedule. Do they tie in any way?
So if I go back to the summary page here, Ms. Stamp. So the required increases right here for the $24 million. So that 24 million. So you can see right here, it says required expenditure increase of 26.5. And then I talked about the reduction due to the non-use of the mission critical, that's negative 2.2. So that comes to 24 point. So those three numbers there, from expenditure standpoint, are the same numbers that total up right here. And then, so those numbers then are not related directly to the fund balance. What the gap between the available, the $9.6 million of revenue to be able to fund this 24 million, there's a gap of this 14.6 million. So 24 minus the 9 here gets down to a gap of $14.6 million. I've got to figure out how to fund it. And so how this scenario would do that would use $14.6 million from fund balance.
Oh, I thought you said you were working with a column with the 3.4 mil. I thought you were presenting from that aspect of it.
Yeah. So for this section right here, this first section on the required increases, these numbers are the same in all three scenarios.
Okay.
So although I'm working from the third scenario, I still have to cover this because it's the same number or the same numbers. So if you come back to the summary here, you can see at the top, right here, the required expenditures in each case is the same number, and the reduction of 2.2 million is the same in each of the three scenarios. So right here, for each scenario, then the required expenditures would be the $24 million, 24.3.
Okay.
I want to make sure there's clarity on that because next I'm going to get non-required increases. Okay. All right. So next then, take a look at the additional increases here that's being requested. So learning services, compliance and expansion, school-based 6.4 million, and then expansions for learning services, central office-based 213,000. Now I have another sheet here in a minute that we can see some details on this, and Ms. Belcher's online, and she can talk through those details. But for right now, just talk about that. These are the increases for learning services, school-based and central-based. I tell you what, why don't we just do this? Why don't we just go to that sheet now? So this is the breakout of that the $6.4 million here for a school base. So it's the left-hand side school base, and then the central office here, the 213,000. So if you come to the top here for the school base and central office base, we have this compliance section. So here for the English as a second language students here, we have this 13.5 FT increase proposed, and that is, I think 12 positions are for new bilingual secretaries in our schools. So we all know that we have the DOJ issue out there, but we have a lot of, we have an increase in our English language learners, and so there's been some challenges in making sure that their parents are able to engage effectively with their schools. And so these bilingual secretaries is to address that. So I'll let Carolyn talk about anything else here on the compliance piece. So I'll pause and Carolyn, you mind going through it?
Nope, I'm here now. Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone. So the bulk of this, as you can see, is the exceptional education piece. There are two pieces to that, which is that we've been funding some of our special education from the IDEA federal funds, but they don't fully fund. And we knew that we had to move some of our costs for exceptional education over to the general operating fund this year. So this has been a commitment that was outlined for a couple of years out, and we're moving towards that now. And then the additional 1.7, or about 27 positions, is the anticipated cost from the exceptional education department as they look at the current students' IEPs and the different service programs that we're going to need to provide the kids coming back in after COVID. Because again, we were declined enrollment as well, and we have increased needs. So that is the most significant of the investments. Also in our Montessori adolescent programs, so our middle school Montessori programs, those kids are not necessarily getting computer science classes. So we're adding which puts them at a disadvantage in terms of credits going into the high school. So we're adding some positions to the Montessori programs to meet that need in order to make sure that they are aligned to the other middle school programs and the offerings that are there. Questions or concerns about the requirements?
Okay, and then below that, then on the school side, then you can see the expansions for the various schools. So starting with Celebration Schools Department, I'm sorry, that's in the central office. Here, the fine arts, you can see that increase, the curriculum, the CTE increase. East Cooper CAS, they're requesting additional staff at that Center for Advanced Studies. Lucy Beckham is trying to prepare for the full rollout of their 4 years of school. So understand that it's a phased in, but they're trying to make sure that they have all their programs in place. For instance, trying to establish the appropriate math program. They need additional staff to do that. Deer Park, I don't remember the details there, but we have folks on who can talk about that. The Cooper River Center for Advanced Study, another position there. West Ashley High School for some miscellaneous work there. Early colleges requesting additional support to help eliminate some of the barriers that students have. Baptist Hill, that is a classified hourly position. And then St. John's trying to shore up some of their academic programs. And then this bottom here, this school startup, we have the Baptist Hill CTE that have a couple of programs that have been built out there, facilities-wise, and trying to staff it. So again, at a high level, those are the requests for learning services. And then at the committee of the whole on Monday, we'll go into Ms. Belcher will go into more detail.
Quick question. This is Ken again, and I apologize if this is backtracking a bit, but when when you look at when we ultimately apply for the ESSER 2 and 3 funding, and I know we have to put together our plan, but can that plan include costs that were either already in our budget or even better, costs that we've already incurred and spent in the last, this calendar year, this academic year, that are related to otherwise qualified expenses?
In some instances, so for example, I mentioned that when we built the budget last year this time, we had, before the pandemic, we had projected how many students were enrolled, and then when September rolled around, the number of students was less. The actual number that enrolled, in school was less. And so, but we had staffed the schools with teachers based on the higher number, the higher projected enrollment number. Because of the pandemic and the challenges of engaging in an open school environment during the pandemic, we started school with five days a week in person with many of our students. We elected to not remove those FTE, those teachers, from those schools because of the pandemic. So clearly, we incurred expenses that was associated with trying to maintain learning in the face of the pandemic. And so that when you take a look at all the schools, the elementary, middle school, and the high school, the net of that is I believe it's like 61, 62 staff, FTE, most of those are teachers. And so what we are proposing to do is to move that cost over to ESSER 2, because it's certainly, it's clearly related to the pandemic. Had we not had the pandemic, we would not maintain, and enrollment had dropped as significantly as it did, we would not have been able to maintain maintain that level of staffing. So yeah, we have some instances where we are planning on doing that.
Just as a reminder, part of the issue is that safe COVID capacity means that we can't teach as many kids in the same space. So we needed more teachers just to teach the same programming across in-person and virtual instruction. And that may continue for next year, given safe COVID capacity constraints are still in place right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, next here, but it says other considerations under human resources. We have several categories. Currently, with the teacher salary schedule, teachers max out on step increases once they reach 25 years of service. And so Mr. Brigman over in HR has a plan to over time increase that from 25 years to 28 years. So this will be 1 year of implementation, the first year of implementation, moving from 25 to 26 years. That's the 535,000. Non-teacher step increases. We talked about the teacher step increases a few minutes ago. And by the way, with the teacher step increase and the $1,000 additional salary that the state is indicating that will be done this year, that would take the on average the teacher salaries to 102% of market. So we have the salary study that was done across all employee groups several years ago, and that is maintained, kept up to date. And looking at the numbers then, with the numbers of increasing the amount of increase in teacher salaries with the step and the $1,000 salary increase, that would put teachers at 102% of market. So, but with the non-teaching staff, that we're below that level. So for non-teaching staff increases, there's almost $2 million to move all other non-teachers to 95% of market. It's 5.9 million. So if the committee will recall and the board members will recall that several months ago, there was a vote by the board to move staff to 98% of market in fiscal year 22, and then move to 100% of market in fiscal year 23. So looking at that, all the numbers that we run, we're bringing forward a recommendation instead of 98% of market 95% of market. Our classified hourly employees are, I think, probably roughly, and Mr. Brigham is able to correct me if I'm wrong, around 91, maybe 92% of market, where it's administrators are 94%. So this would take both categories up to 95% of market. If we were to move to 98% of the market, there'd be another 1.8 mil increase on top of the 3.4 that's in this option here. The next one here, move classified staff hiring cap from 15 to 18 years. So when an hourly classified person comes into the employment, comes into the district as a new employee with years of experience prior to this year, the maximum years of experience that we would give them for pay purposes was 12. So in the fiscal year 21 budget, the current year, the board voted to move that from a cap of 12 to 15. And so when we did the budget last year, we talked about, again, a phasing in to move it up higher. And so this is to give those employees a cap of 18 years versus 15 that they currently have on this current budget versus 12 years prior to this current budget. That's at $570,000. Other safety and risk services request that is coming out of the legal office to make sure. Hold on a second. Lisa, can you weigh in on what I can't remember? I don't remember what that 105,000 was for on other safety and risk services. Can you remind me?
I believe that the biggest piece of it was a position for investigating on the I want to say workers' comp side of the house.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So that's right, correct. Yeah, I remember. So currently we have an investigator that does whatever type of investigations that he does, but we don't have a person that looks at workers' comp type claims and try and figure out how we can reduce our workers' comp expenditures. And so this is an investigative position to improve our outcomes there. So that's the primary purpose of that, the majority of that. The next one, finance position, we're going to talk about this in more detail next Monday at the Audit and Finance Committee, but at a high level, this is for two positions. One is a new position that we're proposing. By the way, the B here, you see in the footnote here, we're proposing. So we have an indirect rate that's approved by the state every year that we apply to federal grants. So if you have $100 million worth of federal grant dollars coming in, you have indirect, you have people doing work that otherwise we wouldn't have on staff. So we still have to pay payroll. All those federal dollars we have to pay payroll. All the payroll people are funded out of the General Operating Fund. We have to have contracts. We have to have all of the HR services, all indirect services that an organization that's involved in. We still have to use those same expenditures for those federal grants. And so we are allowed to put into the general fund a revenue amount associated with an indirect rate, and that indirect rate is approved by the state. So for this year, fiscal year 21, that rate is 4.58%. Just so happened that I just reviewed the rate for next year this afternoon, so that rate will be 4.61% next year, but currently it's 4.58%. And so what we've done in the revenue, we've taken an estimated amount of new federal dollars, the ESSA dollars that will be coming in, that we would expend in fiscal year 22, and we have applied that 4.58% rate, and whatever that number is, we put that in as additional revenue into the General Operating Fund. And so we're proposing to fund these two positions here using that funding mechanism. One is a new position in the budget office. So, currently we have, I don't know, $90 million or so in federal funds. That number is going to increase by $250 million. So that's a lot of management of that. So it's not just it comes in and sits there and then it rolls out. There's a lot of management of volume of money. And so the intent is to bring somebody in to help with that in the budget office. The other one is a deputy position to me, a deputy CFO position as part of the succession planning, which I'm going to talk about in more detail with the full board next Monday.
So Don, the position, for instance, that would go into the budget office to handle the funds, would that position go away when the funds go away? I mean, because you're talking about an influx of funds that you probably wouldn't have. I'm thinking about, sustainability as we hire people out of non-recurring funds.
Understand the question. The other position I talked about, the deputy position, definitely would go away. So that position, the deputy position, would help manage all this. That position would, the succession plan would ultimately, that person would roll into my position, and then I would go away. So the position goes away.
What about the one in the budget?
But the one in the budget would not go away because the work is nowhere near over. Once the money goes away, a lot of the work really accelerates because we will have a ton of outside auditors auditing these expenditures.
Gotcha.
We've been told by our external auditors, we've been told by the federal government that these monies will be scrutinized thoroughly, and that we have to have all kinds of detailed supporting documentation to support these expenditures. So that position definitely would not not go away.
We could fund it out of the non-recurring funds for as long as we get them, and then we'll have to pick it up as far as part of our operating budget, right?
That's correct. And I want to clarify, we would not pay for that position as a direct payment for the a direct payment from these funds. It would be through an indirect rate. We apply the indirect rate and put the resulting amount into the general fund.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And then let's see, the disparity study. The disparity study we talked about earlier. So this is the portion that will be funded by the general operating fund. And then there's some miscellaneous operations requirements that Mr. Rory can talk about in more detail. And then let's see. Yeah, before I get into how we propose to pay for this with the $21 million in fund balance, what questions do you have? Any other questions you have on the expenditure side of here?
Any questions for Ms. Kennedy?
Okay.
Okay.
So when you tally all that up, then you come to $40,800,000 of expenditures under this scenario. That's the $24 million required that we reviewed earlier, plus the additional $16 million that's comprised of these numbers from the 6.4 down to here. So then you add the 16 to the 24, you get to the $40.8 million. If you recall that beginning on the summary page, in this scenario, when we subtracted expenditures, beginning base expenditures from available revenue, projected revenue, we had $19.8 million to help fund additional expenditures. So the difference between the 19.8 and the 40 million is the gap that we have to close, and that's the $21 million here. And so the way this scenario proposes to close it is to use $2.7 million, which I've talked about earlier, of unspent mission critical from the fiscal year 21 budget. That would drop to the bottom line, and then go into fund balance, and then go back into the budget to assuming that we have to use it. The $10.4 million is a reduction of fund balance, the use of fund balance. And the only reason why it's highlighted here, because the other two scenarios, we had the same information here, and every number on the other scenarios were the same, except this number here on the fund balance and how much would be needed to balance the budget. So that's the only significance of that highlighted number. And then the use of fund balance cost reduction, I talked about last year we reduced the cost by $10 million. This year we're doing about 4.3 at the end of the year. as we move towards the end of the year. And then that then becomes available for fund balance. Now, the piece that's different, so up until this point, the use of fund balance is the same we've always done the last few years. This is different. So this $3.7 million is it is comprised of these two numbers here, which Ms. Belser talked about, the exceptional children, the needs for these 27.5 positions to 29.8. So it's the combination of this 1.7 and this $1.9 million. So all of those dollars represent new positions, these new positions right here, 27.5, 29.8. The challenge that we have in the district in filling special ed teacher positions, teacher ed positions, especially ed rather, is significant. So every year we have a real challenge of being able to fill positions. So for instance, for the current fiscal year, as of yesterday, we have a vacancy of 37 positions, 37 FTE in special ed teachers. Special ed positions could be a combination of teachers and teachers assistants. And then in January of this year, the vacancy was 38 FTE, so we haven't made much progress. Now, when we begin the year, we do have significant progress. We had 54 vacancies in the fall. Part of those vacancies are filled not by employees. We actually, because it's difficult to find teachers, we actually contract out, do contracted services, and we hire people through through a contract as opposed to employees. But the reality here is that when we look at these new additional positions, so we have these positions of like 50-something positions that we want to add, and we have a current vacancy of 37 that we have difficulties to fill. So we think, based on the history, and not just cite the numbers for 1 year, but we looked at these numbers going back several years, and so the pattern has remained. And so what this footnote here is saying for that $3.7 million, how we would $3.4 million, how we would fund that is we would assume that we are not going to fill all of those positions, but we will put them in the budget, and then we would use this $3.7 million here and fund balance, take it out of fund balance to make sure that we have the revenue to cover these expenditures of these new positions, if in fact we were able to hire 100% of these special ed positions. What I state here in the footnote, and I also state here that based on historical analysis, this will likely not occur. It's very unlikely that we will fill all of these positions next year. And so how this would work out, if the predictions that we're making are true, this $3.6 million that we put in the fund for use of fund balance, from fund balance, would in fact not be used. But from a conservative standpoint, conservative in terms of financial analysis and projections, we need to cover any expenditure that we would have in the budget. And so we were saying we will put the expenditure in the budget, we will cover it in the budget through the fund balance, but there's an expectation that it's unlikely we would use that. However, if it has to be used, the money is there, the funds are there. Now, when we did this 2 years ago, we didn't make any adjustments this year, but when we did this 2 years ago, we elected not to put those additional positions that we were looking at that time into the budget and just manage it as we went on. The number wasn't as big, so we were able to, we had the fund balance was significant, the 145 million. So we figured that the risk was very, very low because of the history of not being able to fill a position. But just to mitigate the risk this year, because the numbers are higher, we're proposing to use the $3.7 million of fund balance. So that's an explanation of the special needs, special ed positions. they are in the budget. They will be covered under this scenario through fund balance. And again, if they are not fully filled, then that $3.7 billion would not be needed. And so when I show that we have in this scenario here, we have $113.6 million in fund balance that in the budgeted, that number will actually be, in reality, be the 113.6 plus the $3.7 million that we think we would not use. But from a budgeting standpoint, I can't budget, I have to budget the way I just explained. So before I get ready to wrap up, what questions do you have on this section?
Okay, let's keep rolling.
All right. And then the last page here in this section here, just simply I just talked about the footnote on the fund balance, footnote C. Here, a footnote B talks about the indirect costs that I just talked about with funding these two finance positions. And then footnote H just explains how we closed the budget gap last year with the $33.8 million in fund balance and the 13.4 of ESSER1 CARES relief. And then this is the section that Carolyn went over on some of her details with learning services. So the last 2 or 3 slides here, just to help you think about how the finances work. This is out of our budget book. It shows, and it's in there every year, it shows the history of our millage use. And so what the allowable mills are, this is dictated by the state, what the allowable mills are. Here, this column, the mills that we used, out of the allowables, what we used. So you can see last year, fiscal year 21, there was no millage use, so no millage increase. In 20, it was 3.48, 3.96 in 19, and 2.9 in 18. A huge jump in 16. This is following the, you see, prior to that, we used very, very little millage, very, very little millage, only 1.9 over a number of years. And so the unused amount increased and our fund balance was decreasing. And then in fiscal year 15, we had the financial problem, the $18.8 million financial problem. And so we had to figure out a way to recover from that. And the way we recovered from it had this huge tax increase of 15.6 mil. So one of the purpose of building up the fund balance is to guard against this type of a need to have this significant type of tax increase. And the allowable millage over here, this is what's allowed under Act 388. So when I talk to folks up in the state and I've talked with senators there, is that, if we here in Charleston talk about we need to change the education funding formulas here, they would look at something like this and say, well, what do you mean you need to change it? We've given you these allowable mills here and you're not even using them. And so what this 3.4 mil proposal does, it takes so the state hasn't given us the allowable millage for this year. Normally this time we would have it. It's the allowable millage is a combination of 2 factors, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and the change in population. Because of the delay in the census numbers, the state doesn't have a change in population numbers yet. So we don't know what the allowable millage is going to be. So what we've done, we've estimated, taken these last 3 years of 18, 19, 20, and taken an average. So the 3.4 mils that's been proposed is the average of these last 3 years that we had a millage increase. And if that's approved by the board, we would still have unused 4.7 mils that we will not use. So that's still on the we call it the look back on unused millage. So that's the history of the millage and how I'm planning on getting to the 3.4. And then I have several pages here that show if we were to have a 3.4 mil increase, what is the impact? You take a look at the average impact to the taxpayer. So this is for impact on 3.4 for a person who owns and lives in his or her house or their house. So it's owner occupied. And so with the owner occupied property in the state of South Carolina, if you live in your house and you own your house, you pay no taxes for general operations of the district, for teachers, anything like that, bus transportation, anything. So this example shows a $200,000 assessed home property value for both the general operating fund, the debt service, and in the combination. We're not proposing any increase in the debt service of 28 mills. It'll be the same. We are proposing an increase in the general operating fund, the 3.4, that gets us to the 122.1. However, the bottom line here, changes in taxes paid, there's no impact on the taxpayer because the owner occupied does not pay taxes for operations, and there's no increase in the debt service. The next example shows a non-owner occupied. So this is somebody that owns a property and rents that property. So this is the person that's renting that property, and we have an assessed property value here of $100,000. And so that person then would pay the increased millage of 3.4 because if you own a property, do not live in it, you do pay taxes for general operating fund. Again, no increase for debt service, so the increase would be associated with general operating fund. And for every $100,000 of assessed property value, the increase would be this $20.40. The next one is commercial property. So these are business people. So we have a debt service, excuse me, assuming assessed property value of half $500,000. Again, there's no change in the debt service. So with the change, the increase from 118.7 to 122.1 in the general operating fund, this property, this taxpayer with an assessed property value of business property of $500,000 would pay an additional $102 per year. And then next to the last one is automobile. So assuming an assessed property value of $20,000 for the automobile. Again, no increase for debt service because of the debt service millage doesn't change. And with general operating fund, with a 3.4 mil increase, the tax increase for this person would be $4.08 per year. And then the final one is personal property, like a boat or something, assessed property value of $10,000. That increase would be $3.57 per year. So those are examples of the types of increases that taxpayers or changes in the tax bills that taxpayers would see with the 3.4 mil increase in the general operating fund. And then wrapping this up, going back to my paradox here of Act 388, I think I've shown this line before, this graph before. So when Act 388 was enacted in 2008, it removed homeowners who occupied their home from the tax base. And what was supposed to have happened was that we were supposed to get tax relief from the state because the state income was projected to increase. And that was right before the 2008 Great Recession. And so this blue line represents the amount of money we could, not saying we would, that the district could raise if we didn't have Act 388. And what Act 388 proposed was that lost revenue was going to be paid to school districts through this tax relief. But because of the recession, the tax relief never came in. And so this gap here represents lost income opportunity for the district. And in the final slide here shows the paradox here. So for fiscal year 22, the base student cost is increasing to $2,500. So every student in the state of South Carolina, all 700-some thousand, will receive from the state a calculation of $2,500. But because of the EFA, the Education Funding Act, how that formula works, on average, districts are supposed to receive 70% from the state, and they're to assume 30% from local taxes. But that is based on property values. And so there's something that's called the index of tax paying ability, this index of tax paying ability. And what that says here this index right here, the higher the district's index, that means that the greater their property values are. And the state takes a look at that in relationship to every other district in the state and produces a table. And then if your index is high, then you're expected to pay a greater percentage of your students' education versus the state. So the index for Charleston for next year has gone up. We get these numbers from the state to this 0.14270, which indicates our property value. So we are the wealthiest county in the state of South Carolina when it comes to our property values. And because of that wealth, instead of getting this $2,500, we will only get $812 per student, or 32% of that. We will generate $150 million when we take a look at how the calculation works using the student demographic data and multiplying it times 2,500, it comes about 150. And so the remainder of that 100,000, then 100 million, gets distributed to other school districts across the state. And so, but with Act 388, we aren't able to close that gap that the EFA funding formula says that we should be able to close because of the our wealth. And so you can see the comparisons here. Charleston will get $812, Greenville $1,825, Berkeley $1,820, Dorchester $2,000, and then $1,700 up at Dorchester 4. And I'll point out that these numbers are not an estimate from district staff. These are numbers from these are calculated numbers and numbers that have been communicated by the state Ways and Means group up in Columbia. So you can see the challenges here, the paradox that we have in trying to balance a budget based on the state allocation. And with that, this is the last page. This is the repeat of the first page, the summary page. And I have this highlight just to indicate that this is the recommendation to the committee. So with that, I've concluded the information I wanted to present. So again, what questions do you have?
So, Don, I have a question, and I don't think it makes a difference in the increments, but on pages starting, go back to like page 9, 10, and 11, you have the millage levy for general operating at 118.7.
That's what's fiscal year 21, the current year.
So in the 2021 budget book on page 125, it says that our levy was 126.7.
Oh yeah, I should have explained that. So last year was a reassessment for the county. And so during when property is reassessed, to prevent districts or local governments from getting a windfall. So had we kept the millage at 126, whatever it was, we would have picked up a significant amount of more additional revenue, a windfall. And so there's this state requirement of a rollback. And so this rollback, we roll back the millage. So let's say we would generate the same amount of revenue had the reassessed property values had not increased. So that's why we have a difference there. And that determination on what those values were came from the county auditors after we had adopted the budget. But that 118.7 really represents the 126 you mentioned based on when you're using the new base of the new reassessment versus the old base of the old assessed property value.
Right. So if I hear you correctly, we thought that we would be charging 126.7 or the millage would be 126.7. But with reassessment, it was determined that the value of a mill went up to such a degree that if we did a 118.7 millage collection, we would get the same amount of dollars.
That's correct. So we get the same amount of dollars as the 118.7 had to be.
So when does a taxpayer see that dip?
I'm sorry, say again?
So so a taxpayer's bills, so like when we got our tax bills in January, they reflected this rollback?
Yes, I'm assuming so.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, yes, because we the district, we come to an agreement with the county auditors in like September timeframe, and we have to certify that this is what the tax is going to be collected before the bills go out in the fall.
So basically, even if we increase by 3.4 mils and we're not increasing debt service, so we're not increasing non-owner occupied, we're still doing a lower millage levy than we were in 2020, even with the increase.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Well, if there's no questions, I'm finished with the budget.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Kennedy about the budget first reading?
And we have to have a vote on this.
Pardon?
We have to have a vote on this. A vote?
Yeah. If there are no questions, I'd like to entertain a motion on the approval of the first reading of the budget.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Awesome. Don, thanks for that.
Oh, Ms. Staff needs to vote. Huh?
The staff needs to vote.
Yes, I need to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had my mute on.
Oh,
Aye.
okay. Okay, Don, thank you for, Ms. Kennedy, thank you for that in-depth briefing on first reading of the budget. Okay, are there any questions, comments about anything else?
See, I can't even think straight.
Pardon me? I'm sorry. Did you say something, Cindy?
No, I'm sorry. I thought it was on mute.
Oh. Anyways, we just have one other item for executive session, and I think Mr. Kennedy has something that he would like to say before.
I would. So we had invited Mr. Brett Johnson to this meeting. He had some he was trying to dial in. He had some technical difficulties. So he was not. We wanted to invite him. We invited him because we wanted to recognize his service that he has provided to the district, which has been tremendous. So he's no longer in the local area. He's a CFO now at a hospital in the Fayetteville, North Carolina. But he agreed to dial in here. I just want, we have a certificate that we're going to sign, the board, the committee chair and I, we will get that to him, and we have a little momentum that we're going to send up to him. But I just want the committee and others on to know that he had been very valuable in terms for my staff and me in terms of trying to understand how we need to think about presenting information. So it was a pleasure and honor serving with him.
Yeah, and I echo for the period of time that I've been involved with audit and finance. Mr. Johnson has been an asset to the committee, and we certainly wish him well as he moves on, and we will certainly miss him. Okay, so with that, unless there are any questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion that we go into executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So we will move into executive session to deal with the contractual matter
Hey, Michael, you should have an invitation to join the breakout room.
And I'll entertain a motion on a contractual matter that we discussed in executive session.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposes? Okay, so the contractual matter that we discussed in executive session relates to purchase of property in D4. If are there any other questions about anything that we've discussed today? And I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Oh, sorry. Mr. Kennedy.
Just confirm what we're taking, moving to the.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Okay. So the items that will go to the board are.
Yeah, so there should be the capital projects report, the Department of Revenue audit, the external audit firm update, the disparities study, the monthly financial report, and the first reading of the 22 budget.
Okay. And the contract.
I'm sorry, and the contractual matter, yes.
Okay. Okay, now I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you guys so much, everyone.
Good one.
We'll see you next month.
Thanks all.
Yep.
I want to thank Mr. Kennedy and his staff. What a fantastic job. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thanks to the finance staff, so thank y'all. Thank you.
Sorry, Dr. Postwood. I usually ask if you have any comments, but
Oh no, it's
I
quite
missed you today.
it's been a long day, but my goodness, what a fantastic budget presentation, the justification, the explanation of the unique circumstances. And I mean, anybody could see the hard work that lies behind this. I know they've worked weekends to get this ready, and I thank you for the opportunity just to recognize them.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.